On this episode of ResiWeek, we talk about working with Nest and how to fire a client. All this and more on this episode of ResiWeek.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is ResiWeek, episode 264, Identity Crisis.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by
Just Add Power, the global leader in video over IP solutions with systems that give you easy installation, unmatched scalability, and outstanding performance.
Welcome to this week's episode of ResiWeek, your weekly roundup of all the latest news and stories for the residential AV industry. I'm your host, Matt D. Scott for AVNation.tv. And this week, I'm pleased to be joined by two of my favorite people. First, we have Samantha Ventura. She is the VP of Education and Training at CEDIA. How you doing, Samantha?
Fine, thank you. Thanks so much for having me. It's good to see everybody. I've missed you guys very much.
It has been a minute, so thank you so much for coming back.
Yeah.
Then we have my good friend, the dear Uncle Richie. He's the principal at Fregosa Design. How you doing, Richie?
Good. Mellow West Coast greetings. Glad to be back. Glad to be actually it's been an AVNation kind of week for me. So we had
it's Monday, right? It's just Monday.
They just keep going. They all at this point they all just kind of flow together, right? I even broke out the Zoom shirt for it.
Ooh. Yeah, I will say I'm wearing the nicest dress shirt I've worn on a Zoom call in a long time. Because today is the day of Zoom meetings, it seems. Mm-hmm. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's jump right into this with a story that comes to us from Residential Tech Today. Brilliant Control and Google are reconnecting after Nest integration rules have changed yet again. If you have been following the Google and the Nest conversations back and forth over the last, 3-4 years, to say that Google has changed their API and changed the way in which devices interact with their systems, every stiff breeze would be an understatement. About a year and a half ago, they canceled and ended the Works with Nest program, which meant that all of your basic, DIY and do it for me products, unless they were already connected, didn't work anymore. It broke like everything. It was great. Now they're saying it's back in some different flavor, and you can now connect things, in this case, Brilliant with Nest. And there's a bunch of features that work with Nest and a bunch of manufacturers. So this is really, really cool to see. Samantha, let me start with you on this. This is one of those, to our industry, this is kind of like the stereotypical example reason of why we as, professionals try to be very cautious with how we work with some of these major manufacturer DIY-ish, light, however you want to phrase that, solutions. Because not that Google does things on a whim, but seemingly on a whim, they bricked a bunch of systems, and they bricked the capability of people who bought into an infrastructure all of a sudden to realize that, not so much. How do we as integrators go about managing that aspect of it? Because these products are here to stay, but more importantly, how do we communicate that to our end users without sounding doom and gloom?
That's such a good question. And I think it all goes down to those expectations, but also you're 100% right. Largely, we rely then on things that could be ever moving and ever changing on a whim, as you mentioned. I think, again, the key to this is a lot of communication up front, where it is stated outright that historically, X, Y, and Z we've seen happen before. Sometimes these things get pushed or changed or altered. It's never, in the best interest of the client and certainly not what we want to happen. But when they do, having a fallback plan is always really important. Now, how can you ever anticipate everything? You can't. However, we do know some of our, most notorious probably offenders of changing things or altering things or making life difficult for us in this industry. And so I would say that it's always good to have something also in your back pocket to offer up as a potential solution if something does happen like that, instead of just always being reliant upon some things that we know, or companies or organizations that we know historically have caused our largest problems.
Yeah, very good. Uncle Richie, gosh, this is definitely not the first time you and I have talked about this. It will not be the last time we've talked about this. How do you go about planning for these things? Planning for X major manufacturer that is a massive global company as a rule who makes the cool product that everybody wants, who, for reasons we don't always understand, has to dial something back or change things that breaks everything you've done. This is not an exclusive issue to Google, to Amazon, to Sonos, to any Sony. It doesn't matter. Everybody does this at some point, especially when they're bigger companies. How the heck do you plan for this? Or do you have to rely on um, resolving it when it comes?
Samantha pointed out the once bitten, twice shy approach that you have to take with the larger manufacturers and with manufacturers in general. I mean, a new product that comes out. I mean, you're going to have they don't know what they don't know purpose of it. I mean, the first part is you always present the delta, right? Do you want it cheap? Do you want it easy? Do you want it reliable? Pick 2 out of 3. So once you start with that matrix with your clients, and again, we've talked about this ad nauseum, right? Your job as a technology advisor is to point out, here are your choices, here's your budget requirements, here's your performance requirements, and here's your expectations. Not only are they short-term expectations, but long-term. And again, with integrators, the hardest part is the identity crisis that they always fall under when they feel that they can't tell the whole truth for fear of losing the job, for fear of upsetting the customer, for fear of driving them to another solution. And for younger integrators, younger companies, not necessarily of age, but younger companies, that's the hardest part, is being able to stand firm and tell your client, here is what you can expect currently. Here is what may happen, not to say it will. And we always have the conversation with people about possible versus probable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some companies, it's possible that things could change. Some companies, it's probable that they will change. And you also have to take into consideration, say with the larger companies that are out there, they've got much larger marketing arms behind them. And when you're dealing with a consumer product, and this dials back to, so let's take a look at this, right? ResiWeek is geared towards the residential integrator, the CEDIA channel, right? We have to more and more bridge the gap between a consumer direct to consumer product and a custom product. 30 odd years ago, we've always talked about it. It was rock and roll, You had the Peter McKeans, you had the Sam Runcos, you had all of these people who just said, it's not out there, I'm going to invent it. Nest, its heritage from a founder standpoint, when Tony Fadell built the product, he was the father of the iPod. Yeah. And he said, I want to make thermostats sexy. That was the founder's push to create the product. Nest is a perfect example of what happens when you go from a founder-driven product to something that they hand over to a product manager. And the product manager goes, it's like it's like trying to build something out of committee, right? Once you start building something from committee and there's not a unifying voice, this is the stuff that happens because they don't necessarily consider the downstream effect. All they're considering is the forward progress because they have no historical reference at that point. And that's what we try to explain to clients. The people or the companies that we work for have a vested interest in keeping you happy. Those are our partners. We have ancillary companies who we work with for their convenience measures. However, please understand, client, that in order for me to give you this $99 convenience box, I am going to have to spend in orders of magnitude your money to make sure that this thing works consistently the way that you want it to. That is a hard conversation to have, but it's a brutal and honest one. And I think that's what Samantha was kind of keying in on from the market and from education, to be able to take integrators and give them the ability to stand firm and say, you know what, this is not going to change. This is where the market is going. We can't hide our heads in the sand and say, no, not going to happen. What's that Drake one? No, the meme.
Thanks for keeping it Canadian. I
keeping it Canadian.
Yeah. Very good.
And this was near and dear to my heart, because I mean, I kid you not, I deal with it on a daily basis. And Google, this is just an example of what integrators will continue to face on a daily basis. And as a firmware change happens, and again, they get acquired by somebody else, they get a new product team. And again, it's we see the end result, but sometimes you have to consider that these are companies. These companies have people. These people who are driving the product go to other companies. So now you get somebody new, and now this new person has an idea. And so there are lots of decisions that occur in an ecosystem, especially in large companies, that honestly sometimes have no rhyme or reason. But as the integrator, you're left holding the bag. So, dig in your heels, educate yourself, talk about probable versus possible. And Samantha said, always have a plan B. And we do. We created in tier levels. Here's ultra reliable, not as convenient. Bridges the middle. We can kind of work with things, or ultra convenient, not as reliable. You have to decide if you want to live with it.
Yeah.
And being able to communicate that. I mean, you've said it perfectly, like having something that isn't like even an intake form or whatever you're talking to clients about, making sure that you've illustrated to them just what you said, all those choices, but then being able to successfully communicate to them everything that you just said, so that it makes perfect sense to them. And it doesn't seem like at the end of the day, you wronged them by not offering them something that was going to work long-term. And again, that goes back to this, the business owner, the integrator, everybody having that ability to communicate successfully to alleviate and mitigate potential problems later on. It's such a huge skill. It's such a huge value to a successful business to be able to communicate those things ahead of time. And so sometimes largely people know all of this. It's just then being able to articulate it well. And that's where I think a lot of people fall short, and could, really benefit from working with mentors within our industry of how they've done it best. Now go model, go follow what they've done.
Hey, thanks for watching the first segment of this week's episode. To catch the entire show, please click the link below or visit avnation.tv. That's avnation.tv.